Happy birthday, Silverside. This is David Farmer, pastor of Silverside Church for a mere 20 years. Congratulations to each of you who has invested in what the church has been and what the church remains today. It has been and remains truly a remarkable congregation. The history is outstanding. In the course of the next several days, we'll be touching on some key parts of the history in some varied and creative ways. Thank you for joining in on this first day of remembering bits and pieces of the history of Second Baptist and, in the last few years, Silverside Church. Over the course of the next several days, you'll be getting announcements through the website, through email, perhaps even through the U.S. Post Office, if it still exists during this week, about what's going on, some announcements. There will be an online service this Sunday, and then on September the 13th, we will have a face-to-face, mask-to-mask service in our sanctuary when we will, in a worship context, celebrate the history of our congregation. On that day, one of the amazing photographers in the Delaware, Philadelphia area, who happens to be a member of our congregation, Bill Westerhoff, will begin a photo exhibit. What he has done with his original images in this exhibit is astounding to me, and he used the word metamorphosis, which has given me the title of my sermon for September the 13th. There will be special violin music on the 13th, in addition to duets by Melissa Hyai and John Siegfried. In addition, on the afternoon of September the 13th, the first of 3 afternoon concerts will begin at 3 p.m. The 13th, 20th, and the 27th, 3 p.m. each of those days, afternoon concerts, and you'll see other information as we go along this week about what kind of music, who's performing, and details about where you will sit and enjoy the concert. Concerts, plural. By the way, the first Sunday in October will be a rain day, in case any of those 3 September Sundays rains us out. We want this to be an important celebration that has us looking back in a healthy way, not longingly, but in a way that helps us move into the future at a very critical time in so many ways, particularly post-pandemic. It has us looking ahead in a very confident, hopeful way that we still have a mission and a place in what's going on in this society and in what's going on in the worlds of those who wish to live out the teachings of Jesus. I am awed and honored to be able to present to you as our speaker for today, Judge Walter King Stapleton. Walt is highly regarded by every member and friend of Silverside Church, a key leader in the church who has lived through many years of its history, having come here as a child and having been associated with the church throughout most of his adult life. His contributions to the church can't be enumerated or even imagined. Despite his amazing contributions professionally, including being one of the 3 youngest judges ever appointed to a federal bench, he remains humble, down to earth, and interested in all the little things that are going on in the lives of folks who do not carry around such weighty professional responsibilities. He is truly a person of ethical standards and truly a person committed to living out the teachings of Jesus in this world. So listen to him with gratitude and with open hearts.
Hey, welcome. Today we celebrate Silverside Church and its awesome tradition on this, its 185th year anniversary. I consider myself qualified to speak on this matter since I've participated in the affairs of this church for the last 81 of its 185 years. A lot has happened during that time, of course, far more than we could possibly talk about this morning. And as a result, I've decided to focus on an opinion a while back. 1939, when I was 5 years old and first brought to this church by my parents, and 1958, when I graduated from law school. This period has been a very important one in the history and the growth of this church. And that period also was when I first learned about what a very special church this is. It's also the last 19 years of the 29-year ministry of Reverend F. Raymond Baker, whose outstanding service played an important role in the tradition that we're celebrating now. And indeed, my life also would not have been the same if I had not been close to Reverend Reverend Bacon through my youth. Everything that Reverend Baker said and did placed emphasis on the celebration of a loving God's gift of life and its potential, and not on death or the so-called, quote, sacrifice, unquote, of Jesus' life on the cross. That emphasis on the celebration of God's gift of life necessarily concerned all human life and what we now refer to as social justice. To give you an example, I had never heard of a Wilmington slum before Reverend Baker described in a sermon his personal visits to the east side of Wilmington and to the shocking conditions there. And it seemingly was not anybody's concern at that point. In a series of sermons, Reverend Baker asked us whether we could and would do anything about the suffering there. Shortly thereafter, numerous members of the congregation volunteered to undertake assignments down in the east side of Wilmington. And shortly after Reverend Baker's sermons, a newspaper article featured a reference to the article and to the slums. And ultimately, these broadcasts and sermons have been justifiably given credit for the creation of the Wilmington Housing Authority, which today is continuing to address any such suffering of that kind that may arise in Wilmington. And as a result of those sermons, I concluded that I could and should include the welfare of others in my celebration of God's precious gift of life. Reverend Baker also taught me that celebrating God's gift of life and its potential had two other important aspects in addition to that of serving others, namely commitment to personal freedom and spiritual growth. There was no passed down creed or doctrine that one must adopt. Each individual was free to pursue and was responsible for his or her own spiritual growth, a growth that enabled him or her to fully realize his or her life potential. By the time I graduated from high school, I wanted to invest my life as Reverend Baker was doing, spreading the good news of God's love and helping others to celebrate the gift of life. I was determined to go to seminary after college and become a minister. When during my senior year at Princeton, the time came to apply to seminary, however, I reconsidered the matter, and ironically, I wound up comparing what I deemed to be my relevant talents, strengths, and weaknesses with those of Reverend Baker as a minister. And as you know, as I've told you, Reverend Baker was an extraordinary minister. And not surprisingly, by comparison, I came up somewhat short at that stage in the game. And ultimately, I wound up at Harvard Law School. That didn't end the impact of Silverside Church on my life, however. After graduation from law school, I returned to Wilmington to practice law. And as with most people, the first few years of practicing law are rather hectic. And more weeks than not, they were 60-hour weeks, not less. After a short period of settling in, I was asked to teach a Sunday school class at Silverside for juniors and seniors in high school. And I thought it quite likely that the questions these young people would be asking were likely to be the same questions Reverend Baker helped me with, and I just couldn't say no, even though I was quite busy. I wound up teaching juniors and seniors in high school for 10 years, which as I look back, I thoroughly enjoyed. After practicing law for 9 years, after practicing law for 9 years, I received a surprise from President Nixon's White House. I was 36 years old at the time. He offered me an opportunity to serve as a trial judge on the United States District Court for the District of Delaware. It was an awesome opportunity to have a high public service impact on my community, of which I knew Reverend Baker would have enthusiastically approved and congratulated me. Before responding, however, I, of course, inquired about the compensation of the job, and it was only $40,000 a year. And the last year I practiced law, my 9th year, was $98,000. And upon further inquiry, I learned that a similar gap had existed between federal judicial service and private practice for quite a long time, and moreover was likely to continue in the future for some time. I was married and I had at that point 3 children to support and to educate, and that made it a very difficult decision. But once again, I thought about Reverend Baker and decided to accept the offer. After 50 years, pardon me, after 15 years of service as a federal trial judge, President Reagan appointed me to the federal court that hears appeals from the federal trial courts. And I served there, I have served there for 33 years. And I sincerely thank Silverside and Reverend Baker for this 48 years of public service opportunity. During those 45 years, on the bench, federal bench, I wrote hundreds of opinions, resolving hundreds of human controversies and problems. And when I started my judicial career, I assumed that the impact of those decisions and those opinions would be my legacy. I now believe that there will be another important aspect of that legacy, however. Clerking for a federal judge for a year right after law school is a very, very popular thing these days. And only those with impressive resumes bother to apply. A federal judge has a responsibility, burden, and privilege when he has a vacancy to have 200 to 300 applications. When a federal judge and a law clerk work one-on-one very hard on problems that they both regard as very important, it really amazed me every time it happens. They form a relationship, a close relationship, that leads to sharing views on such matters as the purpose of God's gifts. As a trial judge, I had 2 clerks a year, and as a Court of Appeals judge, 3. And I have now 119 former law clerks who are all over the world doing most amazing things. And I, of course, don't take credit for those things, but I do believe, however, that Reverend Baker and I helped them to some degree to better focus on the celebration of life, God's gift of life, precious gift. And I think I know they appreciate it. I guess that about does it. And I'm proud, I really am proud to be a member of Silverside Church. I thank God that it continues to provide to everyone who seeks it, and I do emphasize everyone who seeks it, the freedom to celebrate God's precious gift of life and the opportunity to serve the needs of others. May it continue its mission for at least another 185 years. Thank you.